Lots of quarterback news here locally. I had PTI on earlier today, and the top two lines on the bar were Brees, Burrow. So a guy knows a ton about quarterback play and just love talking ball with this guy. Sean Salisbury hosts the Sean Salisbury Show, mornings, Sports Talk 790 in Houston, and a good friend of the show jumps aboard with us here. Sean, thanks as always for the time, man. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks, bud. It's nice to kind of talk football with all this Astros talk. It's a nice deviation, brother. Okay.
You don't want to talk about sign stealing and banging trash cans and mysterious tattoos?
I'm exhausted. I haven't even walked around the studio. I'm beat from all this mental exhaustion. So good to talk football with you, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. Hey, let me first just start with your reaction when you saw the announcement from Drew Brees that he plans to play in 2020.
I wasn't surprised and was so grateful. I don't think, Matt, I know you guys in New Orleans and the surrounding areas of Louisiana do, and that football appreciates when we see great players like this, but I'm not sure we understand what we're thinking, what we're seeing. I believe Drew Brees has played his way in. Now, I know it seems how we don't judge a right guard on Super Bowl rings, but if you only got one, it's like, well, why don't you have three? But when you think about it, numbers, durability, longevity, what he's done for a city, what he's done for a franchise, and even two, but in particular here, and with a guy who hasn't been blessed with a 6'5", 230 body, if we consider that a blessing, and the eye test that scouts and NFL people seem to always love. Tell me he's not a Mount Rushmore quarterback. Mount Rushmore being obviously one of the four. I mean, I can make the argument easily. So it would have been an NFL loss to have Drew Brees walk away. He's still top flight. He can complete 70% with his eyes closed. He's great not only for the NFL, he's a great representative and a great face for the NFL. And he gives the New Orleans Saints the best chance to win another championship. I was not surprised. I would have bet anything that he was coming back to play. I feel like he thinks he's got some unfinished business, even though he has nothing to prove. And I believe he thinks he's got plenty of game left. I don't think Drew Brees would come back if he thought he was going to be a 59% completion guy and not give him all. And who doesn't want 20 years? Man, most of us can only sniff or even dream about that. So I was really, really happy, and I think it's good for the NFL, and it obviously makes the New Orleans Saints another top favorite in the NFC next year.
So, Sean, the one knock that people here will say is Drew can't stretch the field anymore, doesn't have the arm strength. Is that enough to make the Saints vulnerable to where they're not a legitimate threat to win the Super Bowl?
I still think they're a legitimate threat because they have weapons, and Sean's such a great play designer. And, here's the one time Matt, when people ask me when I'm training quarterbacks or evaluating any of that, arm strength doesn't fall in my first 4 or 5. Because most guys that get to the league can make, Joe Burrow doesn't have Jamarcus Russell's arm, right? Jamarcus Russell's arm, but he's got plenty of arm. He made the throws. They say the same thing about Tua, good arm, but not, oh my gosh, overly explosive. So what you do is, and they're good arms, but my point of like the Elway or the Favre type of thing. So we make a big deal. I don't. But here's the flip-flop of it. When you get to this late in your career, here's what defenses will do. They're going to, if you have a brain, if you don't, then you're crazy, is you say, okay, we're going to make them play horizontal football, which is true strength, and you can still move the football down the field going 5, 8, 7, 5, 10, 12, 15. You can still do it. He can still make the intermediate throw. It's that deep, old-school Oakland Raider. We're going to back you off, stretch you, so you have to have that fear. They have the personnel to do it. Is it Drew's strength? No. But people make it sound like Drew can't throw it 40 yards anymore. He can. So at some point in time, like all athletes and pitchers who don't throw it 100 anymore but throw it 91, well, what are you going to do? Well, Drew's already got that part of the game. So I still think they're a legitimate threat because I know plenty of guys who can throw it through a car wash without getting it wet but couldn't drop it in the ocean standing on a beach. So you tell me which one you want. So, yes, is it because I don't know if it's a glaring weakness. Is it tangible? Can we see it and feel it? Yeah. He doesn't have the arm strength that somebody else does, but you know what? I know a lot of players that have succeeded and won championships that don't, push the ball down the field like they once did. There's other ways to win, and Drew's going to have to find those out, as is Sean and everybody else. But that's the biggest weakness, if there is one for him, is that he doesn't have that throw it to a coffee can-sized window 52 yards down the field. But in truth, we don't need to make many of those throws in the NFL to win anymore. And teams will try to squeeze him, but Drew Brees, his accuracy is so good he can make up for it. I'm not pushing them aside at all.
Sean Salisbury is our guest on Twitter at Sean Unfiltered. The car wash analogy was perfect. I want to flip to Joe Burrow. Saw the story about Steve Bartkowski saying that he would advise Joe to pull an Eli Manning. It's so odd, Sean, because I don't know what leverage you have or what you would gain by playing this game. Just let me leave it open-ended. When you see all of this storyline surrounding Joe Burrow and the Bengals, like, what do you make of it all?
I think that's a great question, Matt. And I'll tell you a couple things. And I talked to Carson Palmer at the Super Bowl, and Carson and I, being an SC guy, have known each other a long time. I have mixed emotions on this. There's an old school part of me that says you go where you're drafted, go play and deal with it. And I've watched it happen for John Elway and Eli Manning, both win Super Bowls. And now with Joe in this position, to have an opportunity to call the shots. Listen, what do we always hope for in free agency, Matty? We as players, you hope to get the free agency where the contract's right. You had a big season. Why? So you can either one, test the market or get paid big money. That's what you hope for as a player. You'd love to stay in the same city, but that's what players in all sports are hope for. And it's the same thing here, and it's almost similar. And I understand what you're saying. The other side of me says, heck, it's his career. If the Cincinnati Bengals are not going to commit to expanding a scouting staff, spending more money, if they're okay with just being okay and kind of getting there and making money, and they're going to go on the cheap and they're not going to go out and get after it in free agency and do the best. Now, I'm sure they want to win, but it's like this. We all want to win, but are you willing to make the commitment and sacrifice it takes to not just win, but win a championship, which Joe got an unbelievable taste of this, obviously, with LSU and what they did last year. And so we know he's got that in his DNA to win. But I don't blame him for going through his process, Matt. I don't. And people that want to judge him. And I talked to Carson. I said, Carson, because he was in the same situation Burrow's in, big, strong guy. And Joe's in a better position because, well, Carson wasn't coming off an undefeated season where everybody in the world said it's the best season in the history of quarterbacks in college. And Carson made an interesting point. He goes, Sean, it was a beatdown for me after a while. He was excited, but he had this thing that Cincinnati Bengals, the organization, and as nice and as respectful as Carson Palmer is and was when he told it to me on the radio, that it beat him down to the point where it did affect his career because of all the things we just said, of the non-commitment and the getting to a certain point but not busting through. And so I get it. And this is the nicest guy in the league, maybe. When he's with Carson Palmer, no better guy. So he wasn't really meaning it derogatory, but he was just being honest. He would understand about Joe Burrow's approach to it because the Bengals, the organization, their lack of commitment to consistently winning at the top level, because they just kind of hovered there, affected his career and eventually become worn down. And I know people say, well, a rich millionaire athlete, how do you get worn down? Well, they're also human. So I get Joe going through the process. I do. I get, man, if you can dictate where you want to play, well, you may take some backlash. Why wouldn't you? And here's the leverage, Matt. The leverage is that if he doesn't show up, let's say they draft him, he doesn't show up, sits out, goes, waits at the end of the next year, and the Bengals, once again, their fan base goes nuts because the best player in college football this year decided to hold out in there another year behind. So he does hold the leverage in the cards. Now, the key is, does he want to do his process to stay there or go somewhere else? That's going to be his decision. I used to be a stronger opponent to this, but I get why a guy, because they'll hold your career hostage. If you can dictate where you go and be on a winner, that's why Ben Roethlisberger had such a great run. He got drafted by a Steelers team. Instead of being the second pick on a horrible team, he got drafted by a team that's loaded with talent, Matt, and then he just kind of filled in, and bingo, here you go. So there is something to be said to be in the 8th pick, although that's not going to happen to Joe Burrow, but in his situation, dictating where you go to a better team. And I hope he makes the right decision. I hope the Bengals finally realize in order to be a championship team, you got to commit.
Sean, if it's Cincinnati, Miami, or Detroit all looking for quarterbacks in the top 5, none of those seem like great options.
No, but I can tell you this, right, Matt, you're right. But when I think about, it's not just about wins and losses for me. I start to look about who's in charge, right? And I know Detroit, man, we will always have questions. Miami over the years, for the first time in Cincinnati, with Zach as a coach, but the coaches that go to Cincinnati don't seem to have any overall say, and Marvin was able to do it for a long time on what you're going to do in the front office and the rest of it. I do kind of think, and I still think they're a ways away because of all that went on. But look what Brian Flores was able to milk out of his team, considering that the front office tried to tank on him.
Yeah.
They did, and he still got them to win. So no, they're not great options. They aren't. But then you say, okay, what's the least of the evils? And you say, well, is it that position? Or is it somewhere completely else that trades up, puts themselves in position? There's such a process, the combine, everything we got to go through in an off-season, the workouts and all that. I think, I do believe Joe's going to make the right decision. But you know what? It's hard for me to fault the guy on his career. And you're right. You didn't like you going to the Rams and get to be with Shunch, to the Saints with Peyton, or go with McVay or Belichick. You're probably not going to end up in one of those cities. But I do understand why we've had really good quarterbacks and players go to places and their careers have died because the organization has allowed it to happen. And if the organization is not committed to winning, Joe Burrow is, and we all know that.
God, I have so many more. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. But
I know I talked too long about that. I'm sorry, but
I
want to give people a perspective on what you're thinking when you're in that. I get so passionate about this, I use up your time, so I apologize.
Are you kidding me? It's great radio. Like, I never want to interrupt. I can just sit here and listen forever. But I mean, God, I want to ask about next year with LSU and all. But let me ask one more just with Burrow, and this will be it. And I'll let you. I'll respect your time. If Joe,
we can do. We'll catch up to LSU too another time. We'll get into that. So
perfect. We'll do that in spring. If Joe was your son, or if your son was in Joe's position, what would you advise him to do?
I would, like I always have done in my career, Matt. I know you do the same thing, not only for your show, but in anything that I've ever done. I gather up every ounce of information I want to. It's like, it's similar for me. I don't mean this arrogant. When I was coming out of high school, I was the number one recruited quarterback in the country. And I was the number one player in the country. And my parents did what I would do to mine. We took in all the information, went on the recruiting trips, read all the letters, did everything. We listed all the coaches. We sat down. Everybody kind of wrote what they did, what they liked, and my parents said one thing: make the decision that gives you the best chance to be happy and maximize your career. Because you know what? There was places my parents liked other than USC, and it was a hard decision for me. It wasn't cut and dry. It came down to the 11th hour for me before I finally said, okay, here's where I'm going. And I love Southern Cal. So it was very difficult. So as you go on, and now it's about money and the rest of it, I would simply tell my son, or Joe Burrow, if he was my kid, that you make the decision. I'm not playing. I'm not living there. I'm your father. I support you no matter what. Gather the most information. Go back to the old pro and con and which one works best for you and what's going to maximize your career and where you're playing to help that team as well, because you got to keep teammates in mind. And when my dad said that to me and my mother, I would say the same thing to my kids and have. And I would say the same thing to Joe Burrow. Don't let somebody else dictate your career. A fan something. Make sure you're doing it, because guess what? They're not in your shoes, and very few times you guys get to walk in these shoes. Yes. He'll make the right decision.
So true. Always great stuff. Sports Talk 790, mornings in Houston, the Sean Salisbury Show. Follow him on Twitter at Sean Unfiltered. You're the man. Always appreciate a couple of minutes.
The best. I appreciate you, Matty. Thanks, buddy.